everyone, this is Mindy Eggen. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, we are going to create a fun interactive card, and this is going to be the Swivel Surprise. Because this is an interactive card, I wanted to show you what it is going to do. So this is what I am going to be creating today. I'll be using the Winter Skies stamp set. Now, I do plan on stamping this out and coloring it in with alcohol markers, but I did want to let you know that there is a coloring stencil available. So if you would prefer to ink blend, you do have that option to pick up the coloring stencils. I'm going to start by placing my images down onto some 80-pound white cardstock, and then I'm going to pick them up with the door of the Misti. Now, I decided to do some no-line coloring today, and for that, I will be using the Lawn Fawn Jellyfish Ink. This is made for alcohol markers, so it is safe to use. I'm going to ink up my images and stamp it down, and I realized I did not clean my stamp set very well the last time I used it. So the ink is a little bit darker. There's still some black ink on there a little bit. So the lines are a little darker than I anticipated, but that's going to be okay. I'm still going to be able to get a no line coloring look. And really, all that means is that we are not going to have a black outline. Now, since I have my stamping tool out, I'm going to go ahead and stamp this Santa and his reindeer, so that silhouette, using the jet black ink. And I also have a sentiment picked out. So I'm going to stamp that right away as well since I had some extra room on my cardstock. This sentiment comes from the Merry Messages stamp set. Now I'm going to dive into my coloring and I'm going to start with my trees. I am going to be using my Copic markers today, and this is G28, G07, and YG06. Whenever I am coloring these trees, I like to flip my cardstock and start with my darkest color at the tip of the tree and also right under each of those kind of separation in the tree. If you're not familiar with no line coloring, as I mentioned earlier, all it really means is you do not have, or you're not going to be left with a distinct black line. So by me starting with this dark gray ink, that dark gray is kind of going to, I almost want to say, absorb into your colors. So really you are providing the definition to your images with your coloring. This is something I recommend practicing. It is a little bit of a learning curve just until you kind of get the feel of how your coloring defines those lines and defines the images that you're coloring in. So definitely give yourself some grace when you start this. Maybe even stamp images out and stamp them in a black ink first and then leave that as an example and then stamp them again in the light gray ink so you kind of have a roadmap of what to color and where to color. For the tree trunks, I had used E25 and E27, and now I'm going to start working on my critters. So for both of them, I'm going to be using E18, E08, and E97. So I'm starting out with this one that is off on the right-hand side, and you notice I kind of turn my cardstock to whatever is a comfortable direction for me to color in. I'm putting my darkest shade right up next to where they are kind of overlapping because I feel like there would be a shadow there from the other one kind of snuggling in there. So I do keep my darkest shade there and blend out with the lighter colors. So as you start coloring with this type of technique, definitely stick with the process because at times you may feel like it doesn't look right, but that's only because you are used to having, I want to call them a safety net. My black lines are my safety net. So I always was able to tell where everything was separated, where the images are. When you get into smaller images or even finer details of an image, it can be kind of hard, which is why I recommend kind of giving yourself that roadmap first until you get used to it. So definitely just stick through with it, complete the image, and then you could always take a step back, even walk away for a little while and come back to it and take a look at it and figure out where maybe you could have done something different or even color it again because we can only get better the more we practice. I know for me personally, sometimes I have a hard time trying to figure out where I should add my shadows with the no line coloring. It just, my brain kind of needs to reset, especially when I have this type of image where they're looking up towards something. And my default is to put the highlight area in the center, which is what I'm doing here. Is I'm going to keep that highlight in the center of his back and on the tail. And if I'm struggling to kind of blend my lightest color, I will do a tip to tip method. So I brought in the previous color, which was the E08. I took my tip of the E97 and just picked up some of the color to help that transition a little bit. For the tail, I'm going to be using W4, W3, and W1. And I'm also going to use those colors for their muzzle. Now, you may notice that they have their nose there. If you're coloring something that is facing forward, you would have their eyes or their mouth. And I'm going to show you a little trick that I do at the end to kind of bring those back out because I don't want to lose the nose on there. I want that to stand out a little bit. So I will share that once I start putting everything together. Now I'm going to work on coloring the scarves. So I did kind of plan out this card just a little bit. I did pick out a color scheme. I'm going to be using the candy cane paper pack, and I had some papers picked out for there. So I'm trying to color these in colors that are going to match. For this scarf, I am using BG49, BG15, and BG13. And then for the other scarf, I'm going to use R85, R83, and R81. I feel like in the scarves is where I can really see the definition because I'm adding those lines in with my darkest shade to kind of show how the scarf is bundled up on them. So I think it's a really fun way to give your images a little bit of an artistic approach while still having that same super cute quality of lawn fawn images that we love. You could always stamp your scarves out onto some pattern paper and fussy cut it out to give it a little bit of texture and maybe some design to it, or even take a white gel pen and add maybe some stripes or polka dots to it. Once I have everything colored in, I'm going to take the coordinating dies and line them up. I'm going to hold them down with a low tack tape and run them through my die cut machine. I will cut off the sentiment. I'm going to keep that separate and deal with that part a little later on. But now I can work on the interactive die cutting. So these are the pieces you are going to need to create the interactive portion of your card. I did my die cutting off screen and I just used the white cardstock for this. So we have that kind of little tab there. We have our swivel mechanism and then we have these circles. So one is going to have that stitching on the outside and then we have our ring. So we need the ring and the inside portion that that ring die cuts out. So those are the pieces that we're going to be needing. I'm going to start with kind of that main interactive portion. It's a little hard to see on camera here, but the die does create some score marks here. And I'm just going to take a pen and kind of go over those score lines so you can see them better on camera. And honestly, you could even do this in person if it's hard for you to see the score lines sometimes. The only thing I would be careful of is this one down here at the bottom. You may not want to add any markings to that because you could possibly see it on your finished card project. So there we have our score lines kind of outlined for you. And there's also one on this smaller tab. So I'm just going to add a little line there for you to see that as well. Now let's go back, take a look at our pieces that we have. These are what we have so far. We have a kind of that ring with the circle in the center. We have a larger circle with the stitching. I'm going to put everything off on the side and I'm going to take that circle out of the ring. So that is the one that I am going to start with first. Everything else I will put off on the side. So my intention is to make this my moon. I'm going to start out by ink blending some antique linen, coming in off of the edges, blending in towards the center and kind of getting lighter as I get towards the center. And then I'm going to add some of these scattered straw. These are both in the Distress Oxide line, just kind of darkening up that edge just a little bit. I want to add some detail to it to kind of give it more of that moon look. So I'm spritzing some water in my hand and flicking that down onto my cardstock. And then I'm going to grab a paper towel and I'm going to pick up those water spots. And this looks really neat if you want to create a quick moon. This kind of gives it that moon effect. Now I'm going to bring in the other circle piece. So this is the main circle that's got the stitching around the edge, and this is where my critters or my scene is going to be. So I like to place my images there to get an idea about how big they are for the circle. And this one is going to be just kind of a nice nighttime scene. I'm starting off with Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink, and this I don't need to take it all the way down to the bottom. I'm just going to have it kind of fade off into white. And then I'm going to bring in chipped sapphire, go around that top edge, and just like I said before, kind of slightly bring it in a little bit so we have that transition of color. I had thought about die cutting a snowy hill for the bottom, but actually because my fade kind of did a really nice fade into white, I'm going to leave it as is. I do want to add some splatter, but I want it to be a little bit more controlled. So I spritzed water down on my work surface, picked it up with a paintbrush to get some finer splatter marks, and then picked that excess water up with my paper towel. As always, when I'm working with interactive cards and creating a scene, I kind of go through everything and lay it out. Now, off screen, I did die cut out that ring out of Pixie Dust cardstock instead of white cardstock. I thought it was a nice way to just tie in a glittery effect. But I'm always playing with my scene, making sure everything fits and getting an idea of how it's going to look. I went ahead and created a side folding card base, and I'm going to decorate the inside. I thought about decorating both panels of the inside of the card, but changed my mind. So here I just took some of the pattern paper from the Candy Cane Lane set, and I trimmed it out with the stitched rectangle stackables. So that's going to leave me just a nice white border around the edge. And like I said, originally I was going to have both panels decorated, but decided I really liked the stripes. So I'm going to add this to the front of the card. Now, when I was die cutting, my stitching is actually on the snowflake side, but you can still see some of that stitching around the edge here on the stripes. It just doesn't have quite as nice of a finished edge to it, but I still think it looks really nice. Now for the interactive piece. So I'm bringing in that piece that I kind of drew those lines on before, and I'm going along all of those fold lines or those score lines and folding them down, and then I'm going to reinforce those folds with my bone folder. We want to make sure that all of our folds are nice and crisp. We had the flap at the top, the flap at the bottom. Then we had kind of those angled ones that go from side to side. And then we have one that is right in the middle. So just folding those over and reinforcing those folds. Then you're going to want to have that kind of facing up and you're going to push in on those two sides where my forefingers are. Just kind of push those in and that's going to fold in on itself and you're creating kind of this point at the top. Now take this piece and flip it over so we have that flap on the other side. So that's up by our point. And I'm going to just kind of draw in here quick with my pen so you can see it. This is where we are going to add a double-sided tape. You want to make sure you're having a really nice strong adhesive because this is what's going to connect to your card and it's going to be moving. This is our interactive piece. So double-sided tape is highly recommended. I did put two strips on there and I'm just going to use my craft pick to remove the backing of that to expose the adhesive. Once I have those ready, I'm going to flip this over so that the adhesive is kind of facing down. And I think of this as like a rocket ship. We're going to bring in our card base and we're going to line this up about maybe center with our card. You can see I opened up the flap on the other end. And then once I feel it's about center, I can push down because our adhesive piece is facing down towards the cardstock. So we have that little folded flap at the edge. You can pull it, test it out, and you can see how our interactive portion is working. Now we can start having fun and decorating our interactive portion. So I'm going to bring in my moon, and this is going to line up with that butter knife. I like how Kelly called it a butter knife. That butter knife piece, so this is the one at the top. I'm adding a little bit of adhesive to that. Make sure none of your adhesive gets on your actual card base or your interactive part won't work. And I'm just going to attach the moon. I'm lining the edge of the moon up with that curve that is on that piece. And each time I attach something, I'm always pulling that tab to make sure that it works. Then move down towards the bottom and we have that other curved piece that we add adhesive to. You can use tape runner for this. I was just rubbing away some of that excess adhesive that got on my card base. And now we bring in the ring. So you're going to slide this under that piece, that tab, and then line up the curve of the bottom piece with the curve of your ring. So this one kind of slides in a little bit. So each time I'm practicing that and making sure that it works. Now we have this smaller piece. So this one I folded along the score line. This one also has kind of a little X on it that was embedded when we die cut. I'm going to reinforce that fold with my bone folder. So this kind of looks like a little chair. You can see how I have it folded up. And this is going to line up with the X that is on our interactive portion. So I'm going to add some liquid glue just to that one little spot there where we have that angle and match up your X's. So I have a little bit of that liquid glue. I'm going to line this up right over the X and kind of hold that down for a few seconds to make sure that it's really adhered and that I don't have any excess glue anywhere. Now, while my seat or my tab is folded up, I'm going to add a little strip of double-sided adhesive to that. I can then remove the backing on that, and this is what our scene is going to attach to. So I just push down really well with my finger, make sure that is really adhered down, remove that release paper, and then bring in my scene. And I'm going to make sure that this is, facing the right direction. I'm going to have my tab all the way over, and then I can just center this over that ring. Once I find that sweet spot, I can just push down right there in the center, and that's all that's attaching our scene. To finish attaching this to our card base, you're going to slide that tab over so this tab is lined up with the scored line of your card base. I am adding some double-sided tape to that, and then I'm going to remove that release paper, and all you need to do is close your card or fold it up. So your adhesive side is facing up, it is going to attach it to your card base. So once we fold that over, push down really well, and then we can open it up and make sure that everything is working properly, which it is. So originally I had die cut that from white cardstock where you're seeing that little bit of excess there next to my scene. I decided I wanted that to match with my ring. So I die cut that piece again from Pixie Dust cardstock. I trimmed off the pieces I didn't need, added tape runner to the back, and then attached that over there. So I kind of tucked it underneath my scene. So now that piece matches my ring. Now I can start filling in my scene. So I'm adding my Santa silhouette up on the moon. Just make sure that whatever you are using, if it's going to extend over that circle, that you don't have any adhesive exposed. Otherwise, your card is gonna get stuck. I did use my liquid glue for that. I'm going to fill in my scene here with my trees, one on each side, just using the liquid glue. I had my critters there as a placement, so I knew exactly how far out I needed the trees to be. And for my critters, I'm just adding some foam squares to this, and I'm going to pop that right over the top. And as I'm working, I am constantly playing with it, making sure that nothing is sticking and that everything works. I went back to my sentiment and I am using one of the banners from the Everyday Sentiments banner die to trim that out. And for the front of my card, I have some tomato cardstock and I die cut this with the Simple Strips landscape and portrait die. Now you don't have to use those dies. I used them to create these strips because I wanted the stitching at the top and the bottom. My idea was to make the front of my card look like a present, and so I wanted that stitching on there. It was just a little something extra. And then any excess cardstock I have, I just put back in with those dies. So I'm adding these two on the top of my card front with a tape runner. And then I'm creating a bow out of white cardstock. This is 80-pound white cardstock. And I am using the die set Put a Bow on It. I decided to go with white cardstock because I thought using my red, it just would have blended too much, and I wanted it to stand out a little bit. So I am creating the bow. I kind of started curling the cardstock a little bit to maybe give it a little bit of that poof, and then decided I was just going to fold it flat. I am going to use my double-sided tape to adhere these together, kind of fold those pieces over, and then I can add this to the front of the card. So on that die set, though, there are the two pieces you can use for the ties of your ribbon. Instead of having them go out on each edge, I cut it in half and I used liquid glue to have them kind of be more towards the bottom. And then I'm adding that with some foam squares. So I'm going to leave the front of the card alone and just have it look like a wrap present. I almost forgot to add my sentiment. I'm just going to use that with my tape runner and place that kind of down in the bottom corner. And a person can always write their message on the other side of this card base. Now I'm going to come in and just add some highlights using a white gel pen. And I'm going to do that to the scarves, to the trees. I didn't want to overdo it because I really loved how these turned out with the no line coloring. Now, for the nose, which I had mentioned earlier in the video, my nose kind of gets lost. So I am bringing in this black glaze pen and I'm just going to carefully color over where the nose is. Again, you kind of want to test your pen out first so you get a flow of or get a feel of the flow of the ink. And there we have it. We have this fun winter skies scene with the moon and the Santa silhouette up there. I love how that all came together. I hope you enjoyed this process as well and will give it a try. I will have all of my supplies linked down below in the video description and over on my blog. Thank you all for joining today and see you soon.